Time for another Plastic Models for Beginners series. Hi, and welcome back to Plastic Models by a Regular Dude, and my next installment in the Plastic Models for Beginners series, the Tamiya 1/48 scale North American F-51D Mustang Korean War. First of all, before I get into the kit and the plan for it, I want to send out a special thanks to Eric Davenport for sending this kit my way, along with quite a few others. Eric, if you're watching this, thanks again for another awesome kit. So the plan for this kit is to do a very basic out-of-the-box build with just one or two exceptions, geared toward beginning modelers. I want to focus on parts removal, cleanup, assembly, and just really getting into the nitty-gritty of it and showing every step of the way, just so beginning modelers can get an idea of what's going on. So those of you who have watched this channel before kind of know what to expect, and hopefully it'll be instructional, or at least interesting for everybody that watches. As far as the paint goes, it's just going to be a basic paint job for a particular aircraft without any additional weathering other than panel lines, maybe some exhaust streaking. Other than that, I'm going to keep it really super simple, because weathering, that can be a whole lot more personal taste for most people. So I'm just going to stick to the very basics of construction and a clean, hopefully well done paint job. As far as what my plans are specifically for this kit, for markings and so forth, I will talk about that towards the end whenever I get to the decal portion, where I will talk about the decals, and I will show some photos of the actual aircraft that I want to build. So with all that out of the way, let's go ahead and take a look at what is in the box and what this kit's all about. As I said at the beginning, this is a 1/48 scale Tamiya North American F-51D Mustang Korean War, kit number 61044, with a copyright of 1996. So this particular kit, although it's an F-51, which was what the Air Force started calling aircraft after World War II, I don't remember the date or the year, but they were P-51s prior, and this kit, for all intents and purposes, is a P-51. What differentiates it in this kit, this boxing, for being a Korean War, is the armament and the markings. That's it. Other than that, it is a P-51, so this will work for what I want to do, which is a World War II P-51 stationed in the Pacific. So that's what kit this is. Typical Tamiya box, nice artwork on the front, additional artwork on the sides of other marking options. I believe there are 3 total in this kit. First thing in the box that's pretty helpful, especially for beginners, are the Tamiya Tech Tips. And what it does, it says here, here are some basic tips on techniques that will prove highly useful when making your model. Gives you a layout of what tools and paints and cements, brushes, stuff like that you might need. Then it gets down into other stuff, cutting off parts, removing excess plastic, using different types of cements, test fitting, removing metal plating, which doesn't apply in this particular kit, and then painting. So it's really helpful, especially for beginners, beginning modelers, if they don't have another resource in order to know what to do or know what they need to build. Next, we have the instructions, and This is a fold-out type instructions as opposed to a booklet type, and it's typical for just about every manufacturer these days. An illustration here, photo of the built aircraft actually, and then some information on the aircraft in 4 different languages. Next page, you get into cautions, tools, again, tools that you would possibly need, and then a list of the paints in the Tamiya brand paint numbers. So if you don't have Tamiya paints, it also gives the actual name of the color: black, white, blue, green, orange, red, etc. So you can use the equivalents of what's available to you or what you already have. Then we get into the actual construction aspects, and I'll talk in detail about that stuff as we move along, but just flows along until step 10, which is the final assembly step. The back page here, or the second to the back page, and this one here, are the 3 marking options labeled A, B, and C, with illustrations showing where the decals go, what color paints to use for certain things, etc. So that is that. Then it shows how to apply the decals. Also, again, in 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Yeah, 5 languages. So there you go. That's the instructions. Next up are the decals. Now these are not the decals I'm going to be using, but I'll talk about it briefly anyway. Typical Tamiya decals has all of the decals you would need for this for any of the 3 aircraft. Some of them are used on all the aircraft regardless of which version you're doing, such as the U.S. Air Force stenciling, the stars and bars, national insignia, and then the small stencils here. A comment about the Tamiya decals: a lot of people complain about the thickness of the decals and the excessive carrier film, which is the film, the clear film that the color is laid on top of to make it a water slide decal. And there is quite a bit of excess, but for most beginners that is not a problem. The decals work fine. They just kind of don't blend into the paint as easily as aftermarket decals that might be thinner, but these are perfectly serviceable. So don't be afraid to use them because they actually do apply really well. This decal here is the instrument panel decal, so that goes over the top of the instrument panel to simulate the dials and gauges. But again, I'm not going to be using those except for the instrument panel decal. I'm going to be using something else, and I will talk about that after I talk about the plastic. First, we have sprue A right there. And the way these sprues are laid out, again, this is for beginners. Those of you who know, you don't have to worry or listen to this part if you don't want. But you have a sprue labeled A, and then individual parts on that sprue denoted with numbers. That's how you know what you're going to be building. And again, I'll talk more about that once I get into the actual build process. But on this sprue, we have the fuselage halves, we've got radiator parts, cockpit parts, including the floor assembly here, drop tanks and propeller blades, spinner, and the wheels. The molding on these looks really good. There's no flash, and for those who don't know, flash is really ultra thin plastic that can be present on the outside edge of a kit. When the molds come together, if they're older molds, sometimes they don't fit completely flat, and some of the plastic can bleed off into in between the two halves of the mold dies, and you will have what's called flash. It's really thin. Generally, it's really easy to remove, but it is an indicator of the age of a kit. Some really old kits can have much more flash than, say, newer kits. But on this, there is no flash. Another thing to look for is mold seam lines. And hopefully you can see right here what I'm talking about. This right here is a mold seam line. And it's pretty common. As technology progresses, they're getting less and less noticeable. But this does have it on these tires, but it will be easy enough to remove. And again, that's something I'll demonstrate, but not bad. So anyway, that is sprue A. This is sprue B. Lower wings, upper wings, landing gear, horizontal stabilizers, the prop back plate. I don't know if that's correct terminology, but that's what I'm calling it. Tail wheel, exhaust, two types of exhaust depending on which version you're building. Landing gear doors, actuators for the landing gear doors, or for the landing gear, whatever, and more radiator parts there. So one thing to note, we have a date here of 1995, and on some of these, I don't think it's on this one, but on the other ones, it actually says P-51D. P-51D as opposed to F-51D. So that just verifies that this is actually a P-51 kit that they've added additional parts. But those won't really apply here. Things to note, nice detail is recessed panel lines like on the fuselage I showed on the first sprue. Raised rivet detail, recessed rivet detail in the ailerons and the flaps. The detail is just really good on these kits. All looks really good. So that is sprue B. We have sprue C. See right there, it says 148th P-51D Mustang, and it's dated 1995. So the actual kit itself, the P-51, must have come out in 95, and then in 96 they added different decals and an extra sprue to make it an F-51. That's a pretty simple part. There's some detail here, some recessed seam detail, and a pilot. Kind of rudimentary, kind of soft. But in this scale, if he's going to be sitting in the cockpit with the cockpit closed, probably wouldn't make that much of a difference. That's sprue C. Sprue D is the clear parts. So we have this light here, the gun sight, front windscreen, and two types of something else right here. I can't remember what that is. But then two types of canopies. One I think is a little bit taller, a little more bulged, I believe. But it's really clear, not much distortion up close. I mean, far away it distorts, but up close where it's going to be, you know, near detail, it's fine. And then we have sprue E, which is specific to the F-51. It has the rockets, bombs, a different spinner, and flat-tipped propeller blades, one of which is missing. So I don't know where it is, but it's a good thing that I don't need them, because that's for the F-51. I'm doing the P-51. So that is all of the actual kit stuff. Now let me talk a little bit about the aftermarket stuff that I am using. First thing I'm using is the Quick Boost brand P-51D Mustang exhaust with shroud in 1/48 scale. Now the reason I opted to go with this, which is a resin part instead of plastic, is because the exhaust tips are already hollowed out. The exhaust tips on the kit could be hollowed out with a small drill bit, but I really didn't want to have to mess with that. And aftermarket stuff like this generally is pretty affordable and saves a step in drilling the holes. The next thing, and this actually came with when Eric Davenport sent me the kit. This was included in the box of kits that he sent. And what these are is the Edward P-51D 1/48 Ford Tamiya kit, flexible masks. And what this does is it allows you to mask off certain parts that you want to avoid getting spray paint on, like clear parts. That's the main thing I'm going to be using it for, is for masking off the canopy and the windscreen. But these are really handy. You can make your own, but these come pre-cut and they're just a lot easier, so I'll be using these as well. Now the next thing I'm using that's aftermarket is Super Scale International decal set number 48-1176 P-51D Mustangs, 4th Fighter Squadron, 2nd Fighter Squadron. So the reason I'm using this is because there's a particular aircraft that I want to do. So let me open this up and I will show you what I'm talking about. First of all, we have the instruction sheet, for lack of a better term. It's copyrighted 2007, so it's newer than the kit even. But what this does is it shows the 2 different decal options that are available in the kit and the colors you need for some of the specific painted markings or paint schemes, like stripes, the anti-glare panel in front of the cockpit, the spinner, etc. It also shows, gives like detailed information, like whose plane it was, where it was stationed or whatever, and then gives decal placement along with all the stencils that are common to both aircraft. So that is what aftermarket decals can do for you. It can allow you to choose different schemes than what is actually in the kit. So that's the instruction part of it. The one I'm doing is Bad Angel, and I'll tell you in a little bit the reason I'm doing Bad Angel when I show the photographs of the actual aircraft. But let's take a look at the decals first. Here are the decals. This one here is one aircraft. This is another, which is Bad Angel, the one I'm doing. Now, these decals, in comparison to the Tamiya decals, are much, much thinner, which means it's much easier to blend these in to the surface of the aircraft to give it more of a painted on look, as opposed to decals stuck on top of the plastic or on top of the paint. So that is a big benefit with these type of decals. These down here are the stencils and the common markings for both aircraft. So you have all these that will work with both, and then you just choose whichever one you want to do. And I'll talk about decals a little bit more when it comes to that portion of the build, and I can show you what I'm talking about, how these compare to some stock, let's call them decals, the ones that comes in the ones that come in the box. So those decals, talk more about them later, but let me get out the photos and we'll talk about the aircraft I'm doing and why. Okay, these are a couple of photos that I printed up of Bad Angel. And these are nice because it really shows some interesting aspects of this aircraft. So like this portion right here, this is a bare metal finish aircraft. It's aluminum colored, and except for the stuff that's been painted on. But you can see here that there's even color differentiations in certain parts of the aircraft. So like this here, that is darker than the surrounding panels. This is darker here. Now I think, I'm not 100% sure, I can't remember, but I think these are actually stainless steel as opposed to aluminum because of the heat generated by the exhaust. But don't quote me on that. Also shows some drop tank detail, placement of the what we would refer to as decals, but for them they were probably painted on. They could be stickers, I guess, I don't know, but shows some really interesting things. And for a person who wanted to weather an aircraft, this is a good source because it shows paint chipping on the black stripes. It shows most of this placard right here has been chipped off. The stencil information here about the aircraft and the pilot is really faded, like it's been wiped down a lot, scuffed, whatever. So it's a really good reference for stuff like that. But that's that photo, and then we have this photo here, the close-up of the pilot, and more of this fading that I was talking about. His name there, more differences in color. On certain aspects of the fuselage and wings. It's really interesting stuff and a good resource if a person wanted to weather. We're not going to be doing that on this kit. We're going to keep it simple. But here's the interesting part, and here's the reason why I chose this aircraft. Right here is a black square, rectangle, whatever it is, with all of the kill marks from aircraft he has shot down. And I'm sure you've been seeing this the whole time I'm talking about this. It's kind of weird. There's a couple of things interesting about this. First of all, we've got the European theater here, which is German aircraft and one Italian aircraft. Then we have a Japanese aircraft in the Pacific. So he operated in both theaters during the war. But the most interesting aspect is this right here. That is an American flag, and yes, he shot down an American aircraft. Here's the story as I remember it, and I will try and remember to add a link to where you can read about this yourself in the description box down below. But here's how it goes as far as I can remember. In the Pacific, he was on patrol or whatever he was doing, and he noticed and he was in an area where the islands were under Japanese control. He noticed a C-47 transport aircraft headed toward one of these islands. Apparently the plane was having trouble. He tried to contact the plane, and because they had to set down somewhere, but they weren't responding. So he tried contacting on the radio, no response. So then he got him next to him, tried to wave him off, nothing. So he decided the best thing he could do was to shoot them down, to keep them from going to the Japanese held island. So that's what he did. Pulled up behind him, lined up carefully, slow moving target, not taking any kind of evasive action, and he shot the engine or engines out. I can't remember if it was one or both. So the plane had to ditch in the ocean, and that's what it did. Crash landed. The people were able to get out of the aircraft. I don't know if there were injuries or not. If they were, they weren't bad enough that anybody had to be, left inside the plane. He flew back to base, told them what happened. Next morning, they sent out a rescue aircraft. They got to the point where the plane was shot down, and they were able to rescue all of the people on board. Now here's where it gets really interesting. One of the people on this aircraft was a nurse that he just happened to have dated prior to this whole incident. So he dated this girl, and then he shot her out of the sky. But it gets even better, because after that, at some point, they got married and lived happily ever after. Yes. Cool story. And that's why I picked this particular color scheme for this pilot, because I really, really like interesting backstories that go with aircraft or vehicles or whatever. The more unique the backstory, the more I like it, and the more I enjoy building the kit. So there you have it. That is the introduction to the plastic models for beginners, 1/48 scale Tamiya F-51D that I'll be calling P-51D from here on out, in the markings for Bad Angel. So I hope you enjoyed this video. If you're going to follow along, I hope the stuff that I present in the future will be informative and helpful in building your own kit. And if you liked the video, give me a thumbs up if you would. And if you haven't subscribed yet and you do want to follow along, or you want to see other builds, please hit the subscribe button. So that's it for now. Thanks for watching, and until next time, I will see you all later.